I always imagined my proposal would be a magical moment, something straight out of a fairy tale, but as I stood there, my boyfriend down on one knee, the words caught in his throat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't him. His eyes were filled with love, his hands trembling as he held the ring. It was her, his mother. She stood just a few feet away, arms crossed, a thin smile plastered on her face. Her presence wasn't part of the plan. I knew that much. But there she was, radiating disapproval so intensely that it felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. For a split second, I thought I was imagining it. But then she spoke, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Are you sure this is what you want, Daniel?" His hand faltered, his expression shifting as he glanced up at her. My heart sank. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Daniel and I had been together for 3 years, and I thought we had weathered every storm a couple could face. From long-distance stretches to career pressures, we had always found our way back to each other. That's why I was so sure we were ready for this next step, to spend the rest of our lives together. The only problem, his mother, Eleanor. From the moment Daniel introduced me to her, it was clear she wasn't thrilled about our relationship. Eleanor was polished, sharp, and impossibly perfect. The kind of woman who seemed to notice every flaw and couldn't resist pointing them out. And in her eyes, I was full of flaws. She never said it outright, of course. Her disapproval came in subtle jabs, disguised as concern. "Are you sure this is the right? It's just that Daniel needs someone who can match his ambition. You're very sweet, but do you think you'll ever pick up golfing? It's such an important part of our family." Daniel always brushed it off, claiming she was just protective or getting used to the idea of us. I tried to believe him, even as her comments began to chip away at my confidence. Still, I never imagined she'd try to interfere with our engagement. A week before the proposal, I started noticing small signs that something was off. Daniel was unusually quiet, distracted even, and kept cutting phone calls short whenever I walked into the room. At first I thought it was nerves. After all, planning a proposal wasn't exactly stress-free. But then Eleanor started showing up more often. She'd call Daniel out of the blue, asking him to come over for lunch or offering unsolicited advice about big life decisions. One afternoon I overheard her on the phone with him, her voice low and urgent. "You need to think this through, Daniel. Marriage isn't something you can rush into, especially not with someone who doesn't understand our family." The words stung, even though I wasn't supposed to hear them, but when I confronted Daniel about it, he brushed it off, promising me that everything was fine. "Don't worry about my mom," he said, kissing my forehead. "She's just being her usual self. This is about us, not her." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that nothing could ruin the moment we'd both been dreaming of. But standing there now, with Eleanor's words cutting through the air like shards of glass, I realized I had underestimated just how far she would go. Daniel had planned everything down to the last detail. He wanted it to be a surprise, but not overly elaborate. A quiet, intimate moment at the botanical gardens where we'd had our first date. He even enlisted my best friend Mia to help coordinate the timing, ensuring I wouldn't suspect a thing. The day started perfectly. Mia dragged me out for what she called a much-needed girls' day, while Daniel prepared the spot. I didn't notice her sly smile when she insisted we stop at the gardens on our way home. When we arrived, Mia excused herself, saying she had a phone call to take, and urged me to explore on my own. I wandered through the winding paths until I found Daniel standing beneath a canopy of blooming flowers. My heart leaped. "Daniel," I said, the surprise clear in my voice. He smiled nervously, running a hand through his hair. "Hi." Before I could ask what he was doing there, he dropped to one knee. My breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box, his eyes locking onto mine with a mixture of love and determination. "Lila," he began, his voice trembling, "these past 3 years have been the best of my life. I can't imagine a future without you, and I don't want to try. Will you—" "Daniel!" The sharp voice sliced through the moment, and I turned to see Eleanor walking toward us, her heels clicking against the garden path. My heart sank. "What are you doing here?" Daniel asked, his tone tight. Eleanor didn't answer. She stopped a few feet away, her arms crossed, her expression calm but pointed. "I came to stop you from making a mistake," she said, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of a few passers-by. "Mom," Daniel said, rising to his feet, his frustration clear, "this isn't your decision to make." "Of course it's not," she replied smoothly, her eyes flicking to me. "But as your mother, I can't just stand by and let you throw your life away." I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I refused to let her see me falter. "I think this is between Daniel and me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She ignored me, her gaze fixed on her son. "Daniel, marriage is a lifetime commitment. You need someone who understands what it takes to support you, to share your values. Lila is sweet, but she's not—" "Enough," Daniel snapped, cutting her off. His voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it, and it startled both of us. "You don't get to decide who's right for me. I love Lila, and if you can't accept that, then maybe you don't know me as well as you think you do." Eleanor's composure slipped for a moment, a flicker of hurt flashing across her face, but she quickly masked it, shaking her head. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly, before turning and walking away. The silence she left behind was deafening. I looked at Daniel, unsure what to say, my heart still pounding from the confrontation. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This wasn't supposed to happen." I shook my head, forcing a smile despite the tears welling in my eyes. "It's not your fault." But deep down I couldn't help wondering if this was a sign. If we couldn't even get through the proposal without her interference, how could we survive the challenges that lay ahead? We left the garden in silence. Daniel held my hand tightly, but neither of us said a word until we reached the car. He let out a deep sigh as he opened my door, his shoulders slumping under the weight of what had just happened. "I can't believe she did that," he said finally, his voice filled with frustration. I climbed in, my emotions a tangled mess. "Did she know you were planning this?" He nodded, running a hand through his hair as he sat down behind the wheel. "I told her last week. I thought it was the right thing to do, to give her a heads up." He sighed again, shaking his head. "I didn't think she'd show up. She's never done anything like this before." "Are you sure about that?" I asked softly, my voice carrying the weight of every little jab and subtle insult Eleanor had thrown my way over the years. Daniel looked at me, his face falling. "I know she's been hard on you," he admitted, "but I didn't think she'd go this far. I'm so sorry, Lila." His apology was genuine, but it didn't ease the ache in my chest. "It's not just about her showing up," I said, trying to find the words to explain how I felt. "It's the fact that she doesn't think I'm good enough for you. She made that very clear." "You are good enough," he said quickly, reaching for my hand. "You're more than good enough. Don't let her make you think otherwise." His words were comforting, but the doubt Eleanor had planted was harder to shake. Could we really move forward when one of the most important people in his life was determined to tear us apart? The next day, Eleanor called Daniel. He didn't answer the first time, but when she called again, he reluctantly picked up. I stayed in the other room pretending to be busy, but I couldn't help overhearing parts of the conversation. "I did what I thought was best for you," she said, her voice carrying that same tone of cool superiority. "What you thought was best." Daniel's frustration was palpable even from across the room. "Mom, this is my life, my decision. You don't get to hijack it because you don't approve." "She's not right for you, Daniel," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "You can't see it now, but one day you'll thank me." "No," he said, his voice steady. "One day you'll regret pushing away the people who love me, and if you can't see that, then maybe you're the one making the mistake." I didn't hear the rest of the conversation. When Daniel came into the room, his face was tight with emotion. He sat down next to me, his hand reaching for mine. "She's not going to stop," he said quietly. "I know," I replied, my voice just as soft. For the first time, we were forced to confront the possibility that our future might always come with Eleanor's disapproval. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if love would be enough to withstand it. The tension between us and Eleanor simmered for days. Daniel tried to shield me from her constant calls and thinly veiled comments, but I could tell it was taking a toll on him. Every time his phone buzzed, his jaw would tighten, and the light in his eyes dimmed just a little more. Finally, I'd had enough. This wasn't just Daniel's fight anymore. It was ours. One evening, After yet another tense phone call with Eleanor, I sat down across from him at the kitchen table. "We need to talk to her," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. His head snapped up, surprise flashing across his face. "Talk to her? Lila, you've seen how she is. Talking to her won't change anything." "It has to," I said firmly. "She needs to hear it from me. I need her to understand that I'm not going anywhere, and that I love you enough to fight for us, even if it means standing up to her." He stared at me for a moment, his expression softening. "You shouldn't have to do this," he said, reaching for my hand. "But I do," I said, squeezing his fingers. "We both do." The next day we went to Eleanor's house. The drive there was silent, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. When we arrived, Daniel hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. Eleanor opened it, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp as they flicked between us. "Daniel, Lila," she said coolly, "this is a surprise." "We need to talk," Daniel said, his tone leaving no room for argument. She stepped aside, motioning for us to come in. We sat in her impeccably decorated living room, and I couldn't help noticing how small and out of place I felt there, like an intruder in a world I didn't belong to. "What's this about?" Eleanor asked, sitting across from us with an air of calculated calm. Daniel looked at me, and I nodded, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Eleanor," I began, "I know you don't think I'm good enough for Daniel, and I know you're worried about him making the wrong decision, but I need you to understand something. I love him. I love him more than anything, and I would never do anything to hurt him." Her expression didn't change, but I could see the slight narrowing of her eyes, the way her fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair. "I've tried to be patient," I continued, my voice steady. "I've tried to ignore the things you've said about me, to rise above it for Daniel's sake. But this, what you did at the proposal, was too much. I deserve respect, if not for who I am, then for what I mean to your son." For a moment, Eleanor said nothing. The silence stretched between us, heavy and oppressive. Then she leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Lila," she said, her tone measured, "you seem like a nice enough girl. But marriage isn't about love alone. It's about compatibility, shared values, and understanding the life Daniel comes from. I'm not sure you understand." My heart clenched at her words, but before I could respond, Daniel cut in. "Mom, stop," he said, his voice firm but calm. "Lila does understand. She understands me better than anyone ever has, including you. And if you can't see that, then maybe it's you who doesn't understand me." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly, her expression hardening. "I'm only trying to protect you, Daniel," she said quietly. "I don't need protection from Lila," he replied. "I need your support, and if you can't give us that, then I don't know where we go from here." The weight of his words hung in the air, and for the first time, Eleanor's composure faltered. She looked between us, her expression a mixture of anger, hurt, and something else I couldn't quite place. "I'll think about what you've said," she said finally, her voice softer than before, "but don't expect me to change overnight." The drive home was quiet. Daniel reached for my hand as we left his mother's house, and I held on tightly, both of us trying to process what had just happened. "I'm proud of you," he said softly, breaking the silence. I glanced at him, surprised. "Proud of me?" "For standing up to her," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You didn't have to do that, but you did. For us." I squeezed his hand, a small wave of relief washing over me. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. I just hope she heard us. "She did," he said confidently. "Whether she admits it or not, she heard you. And so did I." That night, as we sat together on the couch, Daniel pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me like a shield. "I meant what I said back there," he murmured. "You're the one who understands me. You're the one I want to build a life with. And no one, not even my mom, is going to change that." Tears welled in my eyes, and I buried my face in his chest, letting the warmth of his words sink in. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of peace. Over the next few weeks, things with Eleanor remained tense, but there was a subtle shift in her behaviour. She still called Daniel, but her tone was less sharp, her words less critical. When we visited her for a family dinner, she even complimented me on the dessert I brought, though her smile was hesitant and fleeting. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but it was a start. "She's trying," Daniel said as we left that evening, his arm around my waist. "Maybe," I replied cautiously. "I'm not expecting miracles." "You don't need to," he said. "What matters is that we're on the same page, you and me, that's what's important." I smiled, leaning into him as we walked to the car. He was right. A month later, Daniel surprised me with a weekend getaway to a cozy cabin by the lake. I thought it was just a chance to relax after everything we'd been through, but he had other plans. On the second night, as we sat by the fire, he pulled out the same velvet box from the botanical gardens and got down on one knee. "Lila," he said, his voice steady and full of emotion. "I didn't get to finish this last time, but I'm not letting anything or anyone interrupt us now. Will you marry me?" My heart swelled, and this time there was no hesitation, no doubt. "Yes," I said, tears streaming down my face as he slipped the ring onto my finger. The moment was simple, perfect, and entirely ours. Sometimes love means standing together against the challenges life throws at you, whether they come from outside forces or within. What would you do if someone tried to come between you and the one you love? Could you face the conflict head-on and come out stronger? If this story resonated with you, like and share it with others who love tales of resilience, love, and family dynamics. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch your heart and keep you coming back for more.